And yeah, today we're going to talk about the best practices of startup ecosystem development. My name is Eli David. I'm the CEO of StartupLink.com. This is my email. If you ever need, if you have any questions or feedback after the webinar, and our Twitter as well. And yeah, let's dive into the topics that we're going to have. We're going to speak about today. So today we're basically just a second. So today we're going to cover a few interesting things. The first one is going to be a little bit of an introduction about Startup Link. What exactly are we doing? How are we helping ecosystem developers with their very important task? Then we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of startup ecosystems. We're going to do a little bit of an ecosystem case study. We have our ecosystem partner, Andrew, here from Kingston, Canada, which is a very interesting ecosystem. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit about what they've done there. They've done some amazing things in Kingston, and Andrew will share a little bit about what's going on there. Then we're going to share a few best practices for the private sector while developing ecosystems, and a lot of guidelines for the public sector while developing ecosystems from the case studies that we've seen so far. During this webinar, we are a small group. Again, this is usually on our other topics that are how to get investors and bootstrapping and startup. We have a lot more people in the ecosystem development webinars. Those are usually very, very small groups. So feel free to be more active, and we'll also customize it for you. You can always ask questions either in the chat, or there is a Q&A button, and we'll get to your questions as soon as possible. So I think that we'll start maybe with a quick introduction about what is Startup Link, what are we working on. So basically, as you can see, Startup Link is a global startup ecosystem map and a research center. We have about 70,000 startups on the map. Lots of publicity. The site is relatively known. A lot of people are using it to kind of understand ecosystems. We also have about 30 communities around the world with 30,000 entrepreneurs. So that's one more thing that we're doing, keeping in touch with entrepreneurs, doing a lot of networking events and pitching events and so on. So always trying to not only work on technology and databases. I'll just say that we have a few global data partners that actually allow us to supplement data, mainly Crunchbase, SimilarWeb, SEMrush. And our clients include a mix of the private sector and public sector. You can see a few of them over here. And I'll just say that we are working with the clients on a variety of models, usually with the public sector, more than anything, the mapping of the ecosystem, consulting on the ecosystem, and also promotion of the ecosystem. So basically the models, you can read more about this if it's interesting for you at ecosystempartnership.startuplink.com. And I just want to say about the report. The report is probably one of the most interesting activities that we do. We built an algorithm that ranks the startup ecosystems of 1,000 cities and 100 countries. This is a very interesting algorithm because for the first time, it really ranks a giant amount of cities, which is important. It's not another top 20 list or top 10, but actually 1,000 and also 100 countries. We built the algorithm with a formula that takes into account a lot of parameters, and it's only going to grow in April 2020. So we're already started working on this formula. It's really exciting to see the changes that are happening in ecosystems and the rankings of ecosystems. The current report is available to be downloaded at report.startuplink.com. So if it's interesting for you, the report is free, and you kind of want to know how your country is doing and how the region is doing, then report.startuplink.com, and you can download it directly. So before we go to the case study, I'll just mention this is, by the way, how the ranking tables look like. This is a partial look of the ranking table. So you can see over here, for example, what was the 2019 rank compared to 2017, and the total score as well. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat. Let's talk a little bit about why ecosystems matter so much. What's the reason that basically, the beautiful idea about the ecosystems is that It doesn't matter if you're building a unicorn, which is a startup valued above $1 billion, or a bootstrap startup. Most of them are actually born in ecosystem hubs. It's very, very rare to see a startup, even a lifestyle business, that is born in a place that is isolated. And why is that? When we actually check why is that you're not only dependent as a founder on your own talent and your own skills, but you're so linked to the ecosystem and the resources it provides you? Because of the following. A good ecosystem gives you access to many resources that are critical, that you will not be able to pull it off on your own, regardless of how successful and talented you are. It gives you access to investors if you need them. It gives you access to high quality clients that are usually in the bigger cities or in the hubs, the ones that are open-minded to work with the startup entrepreneurs. Gives you access to co-founders, to team members, to suppliers. Basically, when you have a batch of like-minded people, you can do business. If you're in a small location without entrepreneurs, it's going to be really hard for you as a startup to do business, which means also to grow and to partner. It gives you access to good ecosystems, give you access to cutting edge knowledge, which is critical because knowledge keeps on changing. And in the good ecosystems, you get a flow of knowledge via meetups and encounters with other entrepreneurs and so on. So the idea is this is critical. The most important thing maybe in ecosystems is the mindset. Everyone is open-minded to and gives you a culture that is supporting entrepreneurs instead of telling you why don't you have a 9-to-5 job. And also ecosystems that provide you, good ecosystems will provide you also with government support as well, public sector support. I do want to say that although you can see over here that San Francisco is #1 on the global list, it doesn't mean that every one of you should go to San Francisco. When you go to a specific, or when you think about relocating, you have to take few things into account. One thing would be your goals, which means that if you're trying to build the next global unicorn giant company, probably you want to go to one of the top 6 or the top 7, maybe the top 10. But that's basically it. You should not be anywhere else. If you're trying to build a really massive Facebook, it's only going to happen probably in the top 10. However, if you're trying to build some kind of a very strong niche venture that will still roll maybe even hundreds of millions, then going to anywhere in the top 200 makes sense as well. So, and it will be easier because the cost in San Francisco and the talent and the competition for talent is fierce in the top 10. So it's not necessarily that you have to be in the top 10, absolutely not. And also each ecosystem has its own unique verticals where it's very, very strong. For example, if you go to Shenzhen in China, this is a great hub for hardware, but hardly anything else. If you go to Odense, a small city in Denmark, that's one of the robotics capital of the world, but also hardly anything else. So it also depends on your vertical. The conclusion over here, when you discuss the decision of living or staying, is the following. You either live it or you lead it, which means that if you're in a very underperforming ecosystem and you're trying to be an entrepreneur, you probably owe it to yourself to leave it, to be honest. If you don't leave it for your own reasons, don't stay in an underperforming ecosystem as a passive bystander. You have to be much more active to help it grow. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. Let me see if I have any questions. Just a second. Okay, there is a huge gap between, Muhammad is asking that there is a huge gap between San Francisco and all others due to missing data, or the tables is sorted and there are other reasons. Yes, there is a giant gap. Let me go back, and it's not due to missing data. It's due to San Francisco being a beast, like a monster. There is nothing like it. There is basically nothing like it. And this is great because we have the total score. So you can see in absolute terms that it's basically 4.5 times better than the next one, which is New York. This is because it's an abnormal phenomenon that a city has become a mega city. Like there is no city that even comes close. And it's because it was the first, it was the Silicon Valley. This is, by the way, the San Francisco Bay. So it's not only San Francisco, it's also Palo Alto and San Jose and all the locations around San Francisco. But yes, absolutely, there is a giant gap between San Francisco and all the others. And we should not trick ourselves into thinking there isn't. It's absolutely smashing gap. And apparently it's here to stay. It will probably narrow with the years, but no one is catching up to San Francisco. So yeah, great. So let's talk a little bit before we move to a little bit the ecosystem deep dive with Andrew from Kingston about why ecosystems matter economically. By the way, this slide is showing you the countries, which is also interesting. You can see that over here, United States have still a very big gap from United Kingdom, but not that big. So San Francisco is a very unique phenomena. Few interesting things is the jump of Australia, if we're already seeing this, and the jump of the Netherlands. Canada, where Andrew is from, is number 3 in the top 3, which is absolutely amazing. The Netherlands made a very, very big jump. We see a little bit of a slide in Germany. And again, you have a list of 100, so you can, and a very nice jump from India. So you can see it in startuplink.com or download the report. In startuplink.com, below the map, you will see the entire ranking tables that are also open for everyone to view. So very interesting information there. We're very grateful that we have tens of thousands of downloads and many, many hundreds of press mentions. So this is becoming kind of an authority of judging ecosystems. And that's why we take our responsibility heavily on creating those rankings. Okay, so why do ecosystems matter to economically, strategically, even to a country? There are a few reasons, but the main reasons would be that the good startup ecosystem creates high quality jobs, and that means a lot of taxes. Let me use an example I'm currently in Canary Islands in Spain, but I'm originally from Israel. Let me use Israel as an example to each one of those benefits. So most of Israeli high quality jobs that are actually paying taxes on salaries are coming from the startup sector. This is a huge boost for the local economy. Exits, take Israel case. You have exits almost on a weekly basis that keeps on bringing money to the coffers of the country, which is absolutely outstanding. Then you attract investors and entrepreneurs, and you also prevent brain drain. One of the problems of countries is that they lose their most talented people because of the lack of innovation and the lack of critical mass of talent. So you have to fight for your entrepreneurs. It's not only, by the way, the countries, it's also cities losing a lot of talent because of that. And also it can improve the country image and its strategic and geopolitical situation. If you have high quality technology, everyone wants to be your friend. And this is something that is critical. You can improve, even if you're not in the best neighborhood in the world and so on, you can achieve a lot only by having a very robust ecosystem. So the idea is that the benefits are absolutely outstanding. However, you have to do it right. And many countries are not getting it right, and that's a problem. Let me see. So Muhammad has another question about Israel. Let me just I'm going to answer this question while promoting Andrew to a panelist so we can do a quick sound check. So Andrew, I'm promoting you. Let's see that it works. So just a second. And I'm going to, while we're doing a sound check, I'm going to try to answer the question. Okay. So Andrew, you should see some kind of notification. Let's see if it works. Okay. So I can't see you yet. There is an icon of unmute and camera. So just jump into error when you find them. And let me quickly go over what Muhammad has asked. Muhammad says that he read in books about Israel becoming startup nation. Could you elaborate a little bit more about it, apart from government support, and what makes a city and country a hub? Yeah, Israel is a very interesting case study. So I'm not sure it's worth a lot of time because I'm not sure it can be replicated. Mainly, what are the reasons that made Israel a startup nation is not because of public and policy. The Israeli public policy is relatively not good. There are basically two economies, the startup economy and everything else. So in Israel case, it was not really public policies that created this thing. In many, many cases, it was the biggest accelerator in the world. Anyone wants to take a guess in the chat? What is this accelerator? Let's see if we have interesting creative guesses. And if not, I'll let you know. It's a difficult one, so it's not necessarily something that you would know. No guesses. Okay, so the biggest unintentionally in Israel is the army. So by creating, basically the army is the biggest incubator of ideas. And this is the main reason of why innovation is so widespread in Israel, because of the need for innovation and the ability of founders to connect to each other. So that created a situation that basically it's an abnormal ecosystem that you cannot replicate. And there is basically nothing that special, not on the public policy and not on other things as well. But it's a very nice example of how an ecosystem is leveraging a suboptimal situation. So you have a really bad geopolitical situation, you have a lot of problems with your neighbors or whatever, and you still manage to build something on top of it instead of this being a disadvantage. And this is really, really good news for a lot of countries, because if you think of many countries, each of them have very specific situations, geopolitical situation, that are getting them down. And Israel is a really nice example of how do you take a really bad situation that most of your, let's say, GDP is going on security and so on, and you leverage it for innovation. So there is a lot to learn over there, but not necessarily something that you can, let's say, copy paste to another thing. So that's the sad truth about it. But yeah, again, from each ecosystem you can learn so much. But I think that the major lesson of Israel is that even if you start very low and everything is against you, you can still make it big. But the funny thing is that it wasn't even an intentional effort. It just happened by chance and by a variety of circumstances. So that's it. But you can still learn a lot from the success story of Israel. And there are other success stories that are very interesting as well currently. One of them is Estonia, that is being in the forefront of digitalization as a very small nation. You have other very successful ecosystems like Finland and Sweden. So there are many, many ecosystems around the world that were not supposed to be that successful, but are making great efforts. So yeah. Okay, I see that actually we have some problems with let me try to promote Andrew again. If it doesn't work, we're going to jump to another section. So Andrew, I'm promoting you again. I took the time to answer a very long answer on Israel. Let's see if we can hear you. Andrew, can you unmute? Let's see if we can hear you. You have the mute button. You're currently on mute. There should be some kind of a button to unmute yourself. I can actually try to do that. Okay. Andrew, can you say something? I can't hear you. Apparently the microphone, I'm not sure if you can switch to another microphone. There should be a button where the microphone is, a small arrow, and then you click the small arrow and you choose another microphone. Sometimes this is what does the trick in Zoom. So keep on trying. We can't hear you yet. And in the meantime, I'll just jump to another section and hopefully you can join us soon. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to use the QA or the chat and we'll get to them. Thanks, Mohammed, for the question. Really cool questions.
Hey, good morning.
Hey, Andrew, now I can hear you. Yeah, super.
Yeah, sorry. So Zoom is saying it cannot detect my microphone.
Exactly.
So I apologize for that. So I had to call in.
No worries, that's great. So Andrew, I wanted to have a quick chit chat with you on the Kingston startup ecosystem as a quick case study. This is a really interesting ecosystem. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about Kingston, Canada. What's going on there basically, and why would you say it's a special ecosystem?
Right. So hello, everyone. So Kingston, Canada is very uniquely positioned. We're in the province of Ontario. We're a small city. We're under 200,000 people, but we are just about 30 minutes away from the United States. We're just on the border of the United States, essentially. There's just a small water body that separates us. What's unique about Kingston's location, though, is that we're just a couple hours away from some very large tech ecosystems. So, for example, Toronto is just 2 hours west of us, and that encompasses something called the Greater Toronto Area, which then encompasses Waterloo. And according to last year's research, that region of the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, it's the #1 destination or source for tech talent in all of North America. And it has more tech talent than, I believe it's New York City, San Francisco, and another city all combined. So we're seeing some pretty significant investments in that area, as well as tech conferences that would normally have occurred in California, but now are just a 2-hour drive from Kingston. And this has happened in, I would think, the last 3 years or so. And then 2 hours north of us is Ottawa, which is our nation's capital, and the big tech company there is Shopify. And that community is doing very well. And then Montreal is just 2 hours to the east of Kingston, and then Montreal is really pushing for artificial intelligence. So I bring that up just because our location is quite central to pretty fascinating tech ecosystems in of itself. And then Kingston itself, what we're seeing is entrepreneurs and communities or tribes, if you would call it, that like the lifestyle that's here in Kingston. They do want to live on the water. They do want to live in a smaller city. And entrepreneurs just want a more moderate pace of life. A lot of the companies, they set up so that their talent or their other staff can work remotely. So it doesn't matter, like they don't need to be in a skyscraper smack downtown. The biggest company that's come in the last maybe 4 years or so is a company called RateHub, RATEHUB, a fintech company. So their chief technical officer wanted just a smaller city to live in, a quieter pace of life, and brought their technical software engineering team out this way. So that happened a few years ago. The company that's doing extremely well as of late is King's Distributed Systems. They're working in decentralized computing, and they won the TechCrunch Disruptor Award in San Francisco. They just won that recently in November. So why our ecosystem is attractive, I mean, there's the lifestyle piece. There's also an incredible talent pipeline from our post-secondary institutions. So we have 3. One is Royal Military College. That's like West Point in the United States. We have St. Lawrence College, and they really push for energy technology, green tech, low carbon technology, as well as marketing and analytics. And then we have Queen's University, which is has a very prestigious business school. So MBA students or artificial intelligence management students, as well as several other things like commerce students that all want to work in fintech or software engineers, etc.
Andrew, I actually
What's interesting?
that Elon Musk, is it true that Elon Musk was studying in Queen's University?
Yeah, what's really interesting, though, about that talent pipeline is in Canada and in Ontario, there's subsidies to hire recent graduates, and the subsidies range from $5,000 to $16,000. So imagine you're a tech company and you're looking for a place to land, and you could go to this community where you can hire this really you could hire very bright students, recent graduates to work for you. And on top of it, you get some subsidy to take them on. That that's very attractive for people. So we do see that as a common reason for companies to come to Kingston.
Nice. Oh, that's great. And Andrew, I'm showing them photos of Kingston now on Google Images.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So it's funny because there's the photo there on the left. We're actually building out cruise ships. So in 3 years, we're going to have a cruise ship terminal, and those ships will run through the Lake Ontario waterways. So, I mean, you could take a cruise from Kingston to Montreal. From Montreal, you could take another cruise anywhere you want in the world, or you could go the other way and go to Chicago. So we're really excited for the cruise ships to come online. Next year, we're going to have the first electric ferries in all of Canada, and the electric ferries will be taking people to the islands. So if you're a tech entrepreneur in Kingston, you could literally live on an island.
I love this. This is you're putting Kingston on the list for me. And I guess one thing that Andrew, you mentioned that was, I think, most interesting and much relevant in many people's cases is the proximity that you have to startup ecosystem giants. So basically, you have massive cities. Maybe I can also show the map of Kingston so people will understand the geography. So you can see Kingston, Canada here, very close to the border with the US. But I guess one of the most interesting things is how close Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal are to Kingston. And in regular circumstances, Andrew, I think this would be a massive disadvantage because basically all the talented entrepreneurs would go to the hubs. But you actually managed to keep a lot of them in Kingston. Can you elaborate a little bit? How did you manage to create a situation that entrepreneurs are staying in Kingston and are not automatically moving to Toronto, Montreal, or Ottawa?
Yeah, so some entrepreneurs will be priced out of Toronto. It just won't be possible for them to set up an operation there. I mean, even if they have a significant seed round, a lot of their money will be burnt on housing in Toronto. And if you just look south to from Kingston to New York is just a 5-hour drive or so. So again, that's another market where people, it's intimidating for some entrepreneurs, depending on the stage they're at, to consider relocating to those markets. So what Kingston has done recently is we've also built out a significant co-working facility footprint. So we have one, in particular, one multi-million-dollar innovation hub that was just opened up in November. Really beautiful facility. Right now, there are 28 companies that are there, but there's certainly room to grow. And when you walk into the space, I mean, it has a very vibrant feel to it, and it includes all the things that any entrepreneur would need. A nice kitchen space, really cool videos, cool lounge, but then also offices if they need it, and meeting rooms. We have another facility, co-working space that opened up called Fractal, and they modeled their co-working space after the hotel, boutique hotel styles. So that has a very different impression for certain entrepreneurs, and when you walk in, it honestly feels like you're walking into like a cool little hotel. They have a concierge, and they're building a community there. So entrepreneurs that land there, startups that land there, become a part of this Fractal community, for example. And that's what we're seeing. So we have another one that was built into an 18th century church, and that really focuses on marketing and companies in that marketing creative space. So what's happening is there are about 5 new community-based innovation hubs around the city, and that really speaks well to people that are considering leaving or that want to come back or that are commuting. So imagine you're going into a meeting to Toronto from Ottawa. As you drive by Kingston or as you take the train through Kingston, it's no problem for you to just get off and go work at one of these co-working spaces. So that's one unique investment. Another one that we've seen is a really big push for women entrepreneurs. So Kingston last year was ranked as the #1 city for women in all of Canada. And also last year, just at the end of last year, we announced a $3.2 million fund for women ecosystem, a women's ecosystem fund, and that's to support female founders. So there's also a small community that's building for female founders that resonates with in the city. I've said this before to Ellie, but our community also has the #1 angel network in all of Canada for new angel networks, and that angel network is called SOAN, the Southern Ontario Angel Network. So these things they speak to people, right? I mean, you have these really polished co-working spaces that they can land in. You have significant investment, and then you also have dedicated investment for women. And when you package it all together, it actually speaks volumes, because they don't really have such a community feel in a place like a Toronto. It's just too big, right? And unless you're one of the massive tech companies, people won't be paying attention to you. And I could probably say the same thing about New York City and Los Angeles and San Francisco. I mean, when you're a small early stage startup, you get a tremendous amount of support in Kingston, and it's probably very unlikely you'd get that type of support in a bigger city.
It's connecting a lot to what we talked about in Israel. Like you take an ecosystem that has apparent disadvantage when you look at compare it, but then you actually leverage on some of those let's say weaknesses, and you say, okay, we might not be the center, but the cost of living here is actually much more lower than in Toronto, let's say, and we might not be a hub yet or a global hub, but we can give you a lot more support than the big hub. So I think it's a beautiful case study of how a relatively small city, and I know Andrew, you guys are using a lot this phrase, is punching above its weight, and I think it's one of the best case studies I know of how a smaller city can actually have a very vibrant and successful ecosystem. So congratulations on what you've achieved there.
Thank you. Yeah, and we appreciate the collaboration with Startup Link, and we're certainly excited for 2020. It should be a really interesting year for different announcements, and this participation, this collaboration you've set up with these calls and learning from each other. Like, we're very excited to keep participating in this.
Excellent. Okay, thanks a lot, Andrew.
Thanks
for being with us today. Super. Always great to have you. Great. So good. So we had a case study. We're going to try to keep on bringing you those case studies of ecosystems as we go. And I think now we can maybe move on to a little bit of other things that we have for the next 10 minutes. And again, if you have any questions for me or for Andrew, feel free to let us know. I'm going to go back to the presentation and speak a little bit about best practices. And again, we're going to keep on trying to bring you those really interesting case studies, because this is a really interesting case study of how a city that is surrounded by giants can actually do amazing things and actually leverage the weaknesses. I just really like this case study, to be honest. Good. So we're moving on a little bit to, after we did a little bit of a deep dive into an ecosystem, we're going to move and talk a little bit about a few common problems that we identified in underdeveloped ecosystems. And this is very common. Wherever I go to, you can actually see those things that transpire in a way in an ecosystem that is underperforming. So first of all, and the first thing that you can see in ecosystems that when you actually try to analyze what is the problem, why are things not developing fast, is actually the private sector. or the entrepreneurs themselves. So it all has to do with the culture within the population. Muhammad, you asked about Israel, for example. In Israel, if you go to work for a company, it's kind of considered that you gave up or that you're selling out in a way. So and in other places, like for example, in Portugal or in let's say Greece and so on, if you go and you say to your family, hey, I now work for Google, everyone is so ecstatic that you will never leave it in a way. So the idea is that there is a certain risk aversion in some unsuccessful ecosystems that creates a situation that, it's harder to build startups and it's hard to get to this critical mass. In some ecosystems, especially in East Europe, you also have a bad image of entrepreneurs. In some countries, the word entrepreneur itself actually has so-so connotations as someone who is manipulating and so on. So it's also, again, the cultural element and the psychological element is very strong here. Those ecosystems usually have lack of trust, which if you don't have trust, a lot of trust in business between people, it's hard to find co-founders, very hard to find investors, very hard to get loans. There is not enough government support. So what we heard, for example, from Andrew and Kingston, in other ecosystems, you have places where nobody wants to support you from the public sector. And that's absolutely a problem. Interestingly, there are some ecosystems, for example, ecosystems in Scandinavia that I can think of, where there is actually too much government support. And if we have time, we're going to speak about this and see how this actually creates a lot of damage as well. By creating sort of zombie startups. So it's always to find the balance of the support. In some ecosystems, you have lack of savings of people, so they can't bootstrap a startup. So it has to be either you get an investor or you can't start on your own. Infrastructure problems, slow internet, not enough co-working spaces, not enough accelerators, then it's relatively hard. One of the most important things is lack of success stories. So the idea is that when you don't have a success story, then nobody comes into the game. People are very psychological. So if you want to build an ecosystem, you have to be in a situation that you, for example, in Israel, we have Wix and Waze and ICQ and Mobileye that was sold for $15 billion. Only in this month, all over the magazines were 3 new unicorns that were born. So the idea is that the population keeps on seeing those success stories. And then it's very likely that younger people will say, hey, when I'm hitting the job market, I'm building a startup. There is no way around it. So the idea is that those success stories create some kind of a momentum that pushes more and more people into the startup game. And funny enough, in the places where you have low cost of living, it's also pushing the most talented entrepreneurs to become freelancers and service providers remotely, which also decreases the amount of innovation there is. So I just want to tell you that basically, what we've learned from ecosystem development is that there is no one clear recipe. Like things that seem really good, like low cost of living, might be actually really bad. So we have a lot of, it's so unique. There is no one model that you say this is right and wrong. It really depends on each city. And each city has to pick its own strategy in order to be successful. I want to say a few words about the private sector. And maybe one question about the private sector. Let me actually see if we have any questions in the meantime before I jump to this. So feel free to ask any questions if you have any. I'm just going to see if we've got a question. Just a second. Yeah, Beth has a question. Are there many ecosystems that have regular convenings of ecosystem actors that assess their ecosystem, identify strengths, and work together to improve based on data and metrics? If I understand correctly, Beth, you're asking about are there ecosystems that are cooperating within each other? Like, for example, let's say 2 ecosystems in the same country? Is this the question? Don't understand what is covenants, but I'll just let you know that if this is the question, that, okay, or just regionally. Yes, there is. And actually, this is one of the things that I remember Andrew told me in the past. One of the very interesting things that Kingston is doing is actually cooperating also with ecosystems with the cities around it. So the idea is that, yeah, let's say the smaller you are, you should definitely try to cooperate as much as possible with the big players because they have resources like universities and so on that you might not have, or specific programs or funding that they only have access to. So the idea is that, and you're also solving their problems as well. Like, for example, you remember that Andrew mentioned Toronto. They have such a high cost of living there that they might be in their interest to also tell their local entrepreneurs, go to Kingston, for example. So there is a lot of this. I'll give you an example from Israel. The cities in Israel, there is one mega city in Israel on startups, which is basically Tel Aviv. And all the cities around Tel Aviv are really receiving a lot of benefit from Tel Aviv becoming such a mecca of startups that you can see, and Tel Aviv is also trying to help those cities. So in a way, it makes a lot of sense for ecosystems to cooperate, first of all. And remember that in many, many cases, the public sector is the government itself that is in charge of an entire country. So for them, it makes a lot of sense to promote also the smaller locations. So a lot of the budgets are going to go to those locations specifically and not necessarily to the hubs. So yeah, basically there is. However, it should be said that there is also internal competition, because in the end of the day, the talent drain is happening also on a global level, but also on a national level. So there is a fine balance over there, and you can always see the sensitivity on this balance wherever I go, whichever country I go to, you can feel it in a way. So it's very interesting. So cities are competing, but it makes a lot of sense for them to cooperate as well. So and yeah, I see that Beth sent an email to Andrew, so we'll pass it to Andrew. This is we're hoping to make a good connection. So yeah, and I totally encourage you to learn from let's say case studies that ecosystem developers like Andrew from the Kingston Economic Development Corporation has learned, because that's the things that were tested and were successful. Okay, so we're gonna move on a little bit to after we talked a little bit about this, we're gonna speak maybe a little bit about the private sector. The private sector is very interesting, and the question here: should the private sector organizations and individuals promote their ecosystem? The answer is no. It's not your responsibility. Basically, ecosystem promotion and ecosystem development should be done on government budgets, on the public sector. However, the other part of this answer is yes, you should actually do it because of those following reasons. And again, if someone here is from the private sector, it makes sense to help the development of your ecosystem. Why is that? Even if you're an individual or just not even have an organization. If you're becoming a startup ecosystem connector, it increases the leverage of your personal project. And I've seen that. I've seen a lot of people that succeed on their personal projects just because they're the person that connects everyone. Branding yourself as a leader of the ecosystem increases the visibility of your project. And what we talked about before, if your ecosystem is a failure and you choose to stay for whatever reason, helping it grow is your interest, because you do not want to take part in a failed ecosystem. So even if you're from the private sector and the public sector has not understood yet the importance of ecosystems, you should probably do your best to, let's say, do what you can. And let me talk briefly about a few things that you can do as a private sector before we go back to the public sector discussion. What should governments and municipalities do to help your startup ecosystem grow? So, and those are relatively easy things. They will not take a lot of your time. And by the way, if you're from the public sector, you should encourage people from the private sector to do those things. So the first thing is to organize and attend meetups, any events that have to do with startups and so on. The magic is happening when entrepreneurs are meeting, and everyone has to facilitate as many meetings as possible of entrepreneurs, because really, really good things are going to happen if entrepreneurs are meeting. Make valuable connections whenever possible. So have the mentality of connecting resources. You hear someone that does this and needs X, connect them. And then they're also going to connect you. So the idea is the connector mindset of constantly solving problems also for other people. The mentality that is required over here, and you can see it in some places, famously in Boulder, Colorado, is the mentality that is being led, for example, by Brad Feld. Is a really an ecosystem guru and one of the let's say, the founders of the approach of give first. And the idea over here is that don't think about competition. Don't think about winning resources, about win-lose games. It's basically give first, help. And if you're helping people, you will receive it back. One other way is to mentor other organizations. And I'm the CEO of Startup Link, and I'm really, really thankful that I have about 3 or 4 mentors that always give me tips about what to do next. So having someone in your ecosystem to mentor you is critical. And yeah, basically, I just say that Startup Link has a city partnership that is also for the private sector to allow to facilitate those connections. That you can see it at citypartner.startuplink.com, and we have a few models there that will help you do exactly that. Now, in the few minutes that we have left, I want to speak a little bit about few things that governments can do and the public sector. So I'm not sure we will be able to go through all this list, but hopefully we can do a few things. Let me just go over for a second and oops, sorry. I wanted to share, Beth, I'm going to share a message from Andrew on the chat, because I think he only sent it to the panelists, so you can connect later. Let's talk a little bit about governments. And the first thing about governments is the interesting headline over here, which is basically the damage government policy can do to the local ecosystem is bigger than the positive impact it can have. So if any of you remember the Google slogan back in the days where Google was very, very cool, it was do no damage. And the do no damage policy is very, very important. If government's policies create uncertainty and confusion with founders, it's over. And I've seen this in many ecosystems. I've seen this in too many ecosystems that basically, first of all, let's do a quick intro. Entrepreneurship is incredibly difficult. You fight every day as a founder to make your startup survive. So if the public sector is not only not giving you help, but also putting difficulties as in extra bureaucracy and unclear regulation, in some places I even saw fines that are being sent to startups, and you broke your trust and relationship with your entrepreneurs from day one. And this is something that should totally be avoided. Over bureaucracy is a silent killer of ecosystems. You need to make it as easy as possible to incorporate a startup, to report the financials of startups, and so the idea is to make it as simple as possible. Now, geopolitical situations play a big role, but it can be mitigated. We gave the example of Israel, but in other cases, there are some ecosystems that, some places where it's hard to get a visa to, and so on and so on. All those things are making life very, very difficult. If there is an ecosystem that does not accept payments by credit card or PayPal or whatever, again, extra layers of complications that founders should not be dealing with and are probably going to leave. So governments should make their best to actually create regulation that is supporting innovation and facilitating simplicity of doing business. I will say that, I don't know if you remember, but I said that sometimes too much government support is doing much more damage than good. So I'll just say that micromanaging an ecosystem creates a little bit of a sentiment of entitlement and zombie startups. I've seen this mostly in Europe. There is so much support in Europe on the micro level of the government actually picking favorites and giving them help, that you see a lot of startups that should not have been existing and only exist because of government support. So this is something to be very, very careful from as well. Sometimes too much support is killing an ecosystem. And I will say that on this note also, if the government is too active, sometimes it is cannibalizing the private sector. So if the government is active on something, let's say like investment, for example, you have the situation in Poland where the government is extra active on investment, you will not have the private sector investing, and you basically also kind of destroyed your own ecosystem. So it's very interesting to see. It's very subtle, and sometimes the best intentions can actually get you the worst results. So it's very, very interesting when you go into this game to see how chaotic it is. The conclusion here is that basically if the government can, or the public sector can only choose one activity to support its local startup ecosystem, only one, you can do only one thing, is to stay out of the way. This is the best thing that, and then hopefully some really good things will happen. However, let's say that you do have a much more positive mindset and you want to help your ecosystem grow as a public sector. As a government, you should focus on the public sector. You should focus on the macro infrastructure. What does it mean, the macro infrastructure? First of all, you need to help the ecosystem kind of databases with database understanding who is the actors there. Because in many cases, people don't even know what's going on in the ecosystem. So it's kind of like an ecosystem without good flow of information. You kind of want to build databases. You want to build maps of who are the startups that are currently relevant. And you want to help spread news between the locals on what's happening in the ecosystem. This is really important. In some ecosystems, you do not have good flow of information. One of the things that public sector should do is invest in the promotion of the ecosystem. For example, Mohammed talked about Israel. Everyone now knows that Israel is sort of a startup nation. This is free branding that is in people's heads and is only creating the reality around it. And the same is going for Estonia, for example. If anyone knows the Estonian startup ecosystem, you will see that actually in Estonia, you don't have that much innovation and you don't have many investors. But the marketing that is being done by Estonia as a digital nation is so successful that I anticipate that reality will follow up and catch up with the marketing. So they have outstanding marketing of the ecosystem, maybe the best I've seen in my life. So an example of why marketing your ecosystem is so important. I do want to say that the first push for the creation of entrepreneurial centers is critical if your ecosystem has no co-working spaces, if it has no accelerators. You as the public sector, you have to build them. Andrew mentioned this before, that they're actually supporting the creation of co-working spaces to reach a critical mass. So yeah, basically there is and one more thing to think about is basically the strategy. So every ecosystem is extremely different. We're doing consulting for ecosystems in a variety of cities and countries. In each case, the conclusions are totally different. There is no one recipe. So the idea is that the public sector should do a deep analysis of the strengths and weaknesses specific to this ecosystem, and then have unique programs to kind of customize the development of the ecosystem. So this is something that has to be, you have to dedicate a lot of thought to it. So the conclusion over here is that basically not doing anything is the second worst thing that you can do as the public sector. So I think, yeah, that's basically, let me see if we have something that is critical, because I know that we're running a little bit out of time. Anyone has any, there are a few things that we're gonna share probably in the next webinars. I'll just say that I wanna go back to the point of nothing beats success, which is an ecosystem is a psychological, it's mainly a psychological social structure. It's what people think about the ecosystem that actually creates the ecosystem. And one of the most important things that you can work on is creating a success story. A success story is basically an exit or some kind of a startup that did a massive impact that everyone around the world knows it. So when you can actually see people using this application, you can tell them, hey, you know, it's from my country and so on. So the idea, and this is what creates the real success. So the idea is that achieving those success stories takes a lot of time. That's why governments and the public sector has to be very involved in rolling the snowball, allow it to start rolling, and then let it go and give the private sector the lead. I will only tell you that when you do have a success story, you need to celebrate it. Do not be shy and don't be humble. Because you have to celebrate it mainly with your local population to get them into the game of the entrepreneurship, and also globally. And this is one of the things that we're doing in Startup Link. And I'll just say that once you have some kind of a success story, one of your most difficult challenges is to keep the success story in the city or in your ecosystem, because success stories have a tendency to go to the hubs like San Francisco or London or New York. And what you should do is probably communicate with them, make sure that they're staying, and see what do they need that they don't have currently, because the emergence of a success story is absolutely critical. So I think that we're really out of time for today. So I want to thank everyone for arriving. Thanks, Andrew, for sharing your story on the development of Kingston and how you pulled it through. And yeah, this is my email if anyone wants to be in touch. We're going to keep on doing those small ecosystem development webinars. They're really interesting and fun for us, especially the case studies. And that's basically it. Until the next time, have a good day and enjoy. Bye-bye.